turn first to you, Dan. From a broader perspective, what would you say are some of the key levers to bring about a low-carbon economy?
So I think we all recognize that the best answer to drive a low-carbon economy would be a price on carbon. And I think there are places that is happening. The European Union has obviously had a carbon charge in place. Some people don't recognize, but the northeastern states of the United States also have a cap and trade system in place that puts a price on carbon. California puts a price on carbon. So I think there are opportunities to build on the jurisdictions that have started down this path, and that price signal represents the clearest, sharpest way to drive corporate investment and focus, and for that matter, to ensure that every one of us are attuned to our energy consumption. But I think we also have to have, in the spirit of Paris and the conversation this week, second and third plans in place, because it may not be politically feasible to get that broad carbon price accomplished in the next year or two or three. So I think there is a really critical role for the modeling of energy efficiency solutions and the sharing of best practices, and a focus on opportunities that go beyond waiting for a price signal from the policymakers to delivering right now on the promise of lower energy consumption. And I think that is also part of the story here in Paris. Lots of sharing of best practices and the opportunity to push those ideas out in many different sectors. And I think that's also part of the story. It turns out waiting around, as we might have done some time ago, for a single solution, a silver bullet, isn't a good strategy. And instead, developing this multiple lines of opportunity, a kind of portfolio of solutions, including a portfolio of energy efficiency solutions, is the way to make sure we get action going right away.
It's what you call focusing more on the demand side of the equation rather than the supply side.
Well, for many years, the answer to every energy question, a supply-demand imbalance, was more supply, create new power generation. And I think as of, it's been several decades, we've understood that that's only half the story, and frankly not the better half of the story. There is really a big opportunity to do what we call demand-side solutions, which is to drive energy efficiency in every sector and in every place where there is an opportunity to reduce energy consumption, to become more energy efficient, and in doing so, to produce the same things we produce, the same quality of life, but with lower resource consumption.
And on the demand side, building energy consumption is key. Building energy efficiency is key. That's an area where Rexel is positioned at the crossroads between building and energy, as you deliver added value energy products and services to building construction and renovation markets. So tell us more about the energy efficiency in buildings and what is at stake here.
Okay, well, just take Europe as an example. Buildings represent about 40% of the energy consumption and 25% of the carbon emission. So there's a lot at stake.
Globally.
And that's in Europe, but you probably can extrapolate these numbers globally. And as a matter of fact, energy renovation is eventually the first opportunity. Now, there's different levels of what I would call energy renovation or energy efficiency. And there has been an evolution in the paradigms over time. I mean, a few years ago when people were talking about energy efficiency, it was very much what I would qualify as passive energy efficiency. In other words, the focus was on thermal insulation of a building. So the heat should not escape. And eventually it was a notion of energy conservation. I mean, kind of the second school of thought, or the second phase, was what I would qualify as active energy efficiency. Example, you have all these incandescent light bulbs out there and you replace them by LED lighting. If you do that, you reduce the energy bill, that electricity bill, with 40%. And you could do the same with heat pumps, and you can do the same with motors, and eventually you reduce and the consumption and the cost of the building. Now the third wave, the third paradigm, I would say, I call it interactive energy efficiency. That's where suddenly, by adding intelligence to the building, you turn the building into an ecosystem, where actually the building starts to interact with the people living and working in the building. So you create kind of smart places and spaces where people live and work. I'll give you an example. In LED lighting, if you add sensors and software to it and controls, you eventually will double the impact. So suddenly you reduce the bill with 80%. And so
What does that mean? Like the light turns off if you leave the room?
Exactly. So you get into dynamic lighting. You walk in, there is present detection, or the light source, recognizes this daylight. So therefore, you don't need that much artificial light. And so by very smart protocols and combinations, almost rituals, you can actually program your home or your building. And so you add to that what you can do in terms of building automation, in terms of all the other applications from heating to ventilation, and suddenly you create an interactive environment. Even to the point that you can download mobile apps where you can monitor your energy consumption or interact with your system. Now, kind of the next big thing is where you move out of what I would call energy efficiency into energy sufficiency. In other words, the building starts to generate more energy than it consumes. There you get into this whole notion of bâtiment d'énergie positive, the BPOP in BPOS in France. I actually like BPOP more than BPOS. But so eventually you get into an environment where the building can give electricity back to the grid. Now we're going to talk about that later, I guess. But so you see these different waves, and it's quite exciting how the notion of energy renovation changes and starts to get a different connotation and a different impact.
I was just going to add to that, and I think this is starting to capture several of the broad trends of society, including the emergence of the Internet of Things and the ability to, again, create smarter lives, one critical element of which will be the renovation of our buildings, frankly, not only for energy efficiency and lower cost, but for higher quality of life, to make it a more comfortable, better space to live and work in.
We will get to the Internet of Things in a moment, but I just want to clear up something that is puzzling to me, because as we talk about better energy efficiency in buildings, I'm always unclear whether we're talking about a new generation of buildings that is yet to be built, or are we talking about renovations and retrofitting existing buildings? Where should we put the efforts, Rudy?
Well, I think the first opportunity is what is out there. So we have out there roughly 150 billion square meters of existing buildings. That's huge. If you then think about how that will evolve, it's quite impressive. In the next 10 years, there will be another 25% square meters being added to that. And actually, the emerging markets will grow faster than the mature markets. But the most fascinating thing is that if you take the residential portion of that, which is 2/3 of the total, the annual renovation rate is 1%. It will take a century to actually renovate the residential part. Now, I mean, we don't have time for that, right? So we need to figure out how to accelerate it. And actually, the technologies are out there. Even legislation is out there. For a long time, there is this phase out of incandescent lighting, which actually forces everybody to move into LED and other types of lighting solutions. But it's almost redefining the notion of circular economy. When we talk about circular economy today, we talk about reuse and recycle and repair. Now, in a building environment, we talk about reconfigure, renovate, refurbish. Now, 150 billion square meters of circular economy, that's a hell of an opportunity in my book. Yeah.
Now, Dan, you spent your life traveling the world and looking at this subject up close. We've talked about the future, but there's the present. You're seeing things on the ground, maybe some cities or states that are particularly ahead of the game when it comes to sustainable living. Could you describe some of these things you're seeing currently that get you excited?
Sure. I think there are actually models all around the world in various places and in various ways that are starting to shift our gears toward a clean energy future. In the United States, California has long been a leader, and they continue to push forward in very dynamic ways. I think there's a particular focus now on shifting the model of our electricity companies, of our electric utilities, and starting to make sure that they're paid to deliver energy services rather than simply electrons. And I think that shifting of incentives will help ensure that energy efficiency becomes a bigger part of the business that they want to produce and promote. So I think that's something California's done, New York is starting to do. I think there's also a value in pushing new resources into making sure the kind of renovation that Rudy talks about ramps up from 1% to a much greater percent of buildings that are getting remade. In that regard, the Green Bank that Connecticut has launched is going to be a model, I think, for the United States and now for many places around the world. And finally, I think you do see mayors who are really taking the lead on this issue. And you have people like Mayor Frank Jensen of Copenhagen, who has a 100-point sustainability plan for his city. And this is just an outstanding and staggering degree of commitment to the issue of sustainability. But it involves really a whole set of carefully structured measures that work as a package that, again, are going to shift that city towards more renewable power, greater efficiency in every system. And it's not only, by the way, the developed world. I was on a panel this morning with the mayor of Johannesburg, South Africa, and he too has got a very big commitment to decarbonization, in part as a strategy for the lowering the cost of business in South Africa, but also as a way to improve the quality of life for his citizens. So I think you see initiatives all over the world at various scales, and this is what I'm excited about here in Paris. I think it does represent a broad gauge set of activities that we can build upon as we move to a sustainable future.
Dan, you just mentioned a green bank in Connecticut, which raises the issue of how we're financing this energy transition. Rudy, what sorts of financial schemes do you think can be put in place to finance building renovation?
Well, there's not a lack of money, I think, and it's at different levels. I first of all think at European level, the recently announced Juncker investment plan creates a framework. It is a 300 billion euro investment plan over 3 years. And it's available for and accessible for any country. And energy is one of the elements in the plan. And it's built on 3 principles. One is a close cooperation between public and private sector. 2, creating a pipeline of projects and programs that really show measurable impact. And then 3, it's based on taking away barriers and obstacles in the value chain. Now, France has understood that very well. France was the first European member state who actually decided, in the context of the Juncker plan, to co-finance with Caisse de Dépôt about 400 million euro of loans to renovate, actually, to do energy renovation for 40,000 residential buildings. And that 400 million actually has created 800 million of revenues and 6,000 jobs. So you just think about doing this over and over and over again. I would say no member state should wait to try to get access to that Juncker fund, because the money is there. Now, obviously, what I see in many European countries is the lack of a holistic approach, the lack of an integral building renovation and innovation plan. And I think that's the next big challenge, that governments locally team up locally with business to make it happen. And then 3, it's about incentive schemes at the level of the end user, where then we get into fiscal and all kind of financial stimuli and even subsidy schemes which would allow you to do that. So at various levels, there's various opportunities today. I think there needs to be some work done on the allocation, in line with a very well-defined plan that covers the interest of all ministries involved in all countries of the European Union.
Since we're talking about financing, one of your specialties is public-private partnerships, financing schemes. Do you want to react to anything that Rudy has highlighted, or to comment on the Green Climate Fund as well?
Sure. Well, let me start by saying I think Rudy says there's a lot of money, and I think that's right. But I think government policy can help channel that into the right sorts of investments. And I think, again, that needs to happen at every scale: city scale, state or provincial scale, departmental scale, and finally at the national scale, and frankly even at the global scale. And I do think incentives matter. This is one of the things we didn't pay enough attention to in past climate agreements. What are the incentives in place that are going to make behavioral change happen? So I think there is a role for government in helping to channel this capital that's out there. And I think one of the other critical kind of policy ideas is that governments can help de-risk the flow of private capital into these investments. And I think the public-private partnership model here is to use limited public funds to leverage private capital. And that requires a whole new set of structures. I think the Green Climate Fund is a global scale mechanism to try to get this done. I think the folks running that have come to understand that they are inevitably going to have way too little money to do all the work they need to do and that they too need to understand their opportunity is using the limited funds, 10 billion have now been pledged, to leverage much greater amounts of private capital. So I'm optimistic that we are on the verge of a kind of a new approach to clean energy finance that fully recognizes the value of engaging the private sector in partnership with government.